African civilization has endured a centuries-long pillory. These severe attacks emboldened modern individuals to proclaim, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Y'all contributed nothing." These lies were manufactured throughout time to justify the enslavement of African people and their subsequent subjugation during colonization. In previous videos, I've discussed significant independent inventions in Africa. I've also discussed direct African contributions to the world, one example being circumcision, according to scholar Christopher Ehret. But I believe one of the greatest contributions to world civilization from the continent of Africa is seldom given proper acknowledgement. Today, let's explore this topic further. What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview. By supporting this channel on Patreon, you're helping in the creation of these videos and contributing to this content. The link to Patreon is in the description box below. To begin, this video is theory-based, so I must stress your caution with the ideas presented. I feel it important as Afro-descended people that we not just read our history, but also analyze it. One of our scholars, Chancellor Williams, encouraged us to read in between the lines of history. At times, we should put into practice the wisdom previous scholars have bestowed upon us. So again, although there will be factual information presented in the video, the conclusions drawn from such information are centered around reading in between the lines of history, theory-based. As always, I look forward to your thoughts on the history presented and what ideas you may contribute to the discussion. The line of thinking of "y'all contributed nothing" parallels with the frequented claim that Africa has no writing. This claim sounds simple enough, but there's a striking undercurrent. The reason why is because the continent of Africa clearly has multiple writing forms, Egyptian hieroglyphs simply being one of them. Thus, in my view, what they're really trying to say is that the agreed upon Black people have no writing, and anything remotely reflecting a writing form within Black Africa has little to no value. Now, for the sake of this video, I'm regrettably forced to use the terms Black Africa and Black Africans so that a modern audience can understand. These myopic terms are problematic for multiple reasons that are beyond the scope of this video, so please keep that in mind. So where is this video going? I'll provide a thorough delineation of my theory later, but to briefly explain, I believe it was in so-called Black Africa that one of the most influential writing forms were created in human history, among the greatest African contributions to the world. Yes, that's a rather large paradigm shift to go from Black Africa has no writing to Black Africans created the most influential writing form is a Herculean leap. I will point out, however, that we've been here before, intellectually speaking. For example, there have been archaeological inferences to the idea that Black Africans were the first iron smelters. This idea was undoubtedly ridiculous, given the baggage of old thinking that precluded Black Africa from the realm of reason and civilization. Thus, its origins in Turkey remained an obstinate narrative. Not only did it originate in Turkey according to the knowledge at the time, but it spread to other peoples. A real world contribution. How could the Mud Hut peoples be the paragon of metallurgical mastery? In 2010, we were at the breaking point of this old paradigm. A new one was beginning to form. Not many people know about it. It's still in its early stages of acceptance, but the data is apparently unassailable. In the case of ironworking, the earliest dated sites in the world for the smelting of iron going back 4,000 or possibly more years are located in the Central African Republic and neighboring parts of Cameroon in the middle of the continent. Iron production activities are documented to have taken place as early as 3000 through 2500 BC. African smelters were the first, centuries before anyone else, to develop furnaces able to generate sufficient heat for single-step production of steel. Hopefully, this illustrates my point. We've been here before, and until new information is presented, this is our current reality. There are some scholars who question the iron smelting dates within Black Africa, claiming them to be too early. And surely there will be those who deeply reject a Black African origin of a very influential writing form. However, regarding the writing system, I believe the evidence on the periphery points strongly in that direction. So what is my theory? It goes as follows. Symbols of meaning formed in concatenation by way of Nubian cultures established the foundation from which Egyptian scribes utilized and improved to create the robust writing form we call hieroglyphs today. To be clear, I'm referring to Egyptian hieroglyphs. Egyptian hieroglyphs, according to the general history of Africa, have been incredibly influential and is a tangible African contribution to world civilization. Egyptian hieroglyphic writing has been traced in the Semitic scripts of the Levant. This can be observed by comparing some typical Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Proto-Sinaitic signs, and the Phoenician alphabet. The Proto-Sinaitic elements were influenced by the Egyptian hieroglyphic ideograms, and they simplified these ideograms in a way which may be considered as a step towards the Phoenician alphabet, and hence towards the European alphabet. This vast pharaonic legacy, disseminated through the ancient civilizations of the Near East, has in turn transmitted to modern European civilization by way of the classical world. In other words, the traditional historical narrative is that the Phoenicians took the Egyptian hieroglyphs, created a new script from it, and then introduced it to Greece. This simplistic idea has been largely abandoned today, as it is more complicated than that. The Phoenicians seem to have had multiple influences, which included the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Despite this nuance, Egyptian hieroglyphs were most certainly influential and contributed deeply to various writing systems, some of which are in use today. Now, we call this writing form Egyptian hieroglyphs, but I prefer to call it Nile Valley writing. My reasoning is simple. I believe the invention of Egyptian hieroglyphs was a developmental process occurring piecemeal throughout much of the Nile, including regions outside of what we would consider historical Egypt. As some may know, the Nile goes very deep into the African continent. My theory, simplified, claims that the Egyptians improved upon and added to an ideographic writing form that already existed amongst various African groups further south, likely Nubian. Scholar Ellen James gives us the tools necessary that anchor my theory. Unlike Mesopotamian cuneiform or Chinese, whose beginnings can be traced over several hundred years, hieroglyphic writing seems to appear in Egypt suddenly, shortly before 3000 BC, as a complete system. Scholars are divided in their opinions about its origins. Some suggest that the earlier developmental stages of hieroglyphic were written on perishable materials, such as wood, and simply have not survived. Others argue that the system could have been invented all at once by an unknown genius. So according to Alan James, Egyptian hieroglyphs appeared in Egypt suddenly as a complete system. The developmental process has not been identifiable in a satisfactory manner like, say, China or Mesopotamia. So where did the process begin? I have 3 historical pieces of information that, when married together, give a solid inference to the best explanation, giving credence to my theory. Let's begin with the first. According to the theory, it was Nubian peoples who sparked the Nile Valley writing system. These ancient peoples would have lived in southern Egypt and modern Sudan. Nubian people traditionally are often associated with so-called Black Africa. One of the first significant signs of Nubian influence on Egypt goes back all the way to the 4th millennium BC, when the Egyptians embraced a rising concept of statehood that began in Nubia. Scholar Christopher Ehret tells us that the sacred chiefs of the Middle Nile Basin cultural area became the divine kings of Egypt, who, as late as the start of the 3rd dynasty, still required actual human beings to be sent along with them into the afterlife. By 3500 BCE, a cultural world of sacred chiefdoms and petty sacred kingdoms was gradually coming into being in Nubia, and the ideas that undergirded these social formations also took hold in the far south of Egypt. Recent archaeological work shows that this political and cultural outlook then spread from southern Egypt northward into Lower Egypt. Interestingly enough, the date 3500 BC that Christopher Eric gives coincides with Alan James's assertion that hieroglyphic writing appeared in Egypt suddenly shortly before 3000 BC. So around the time the Egyptians embraced Nubian concepts, writing seems to suddenly appear as well. Well, how can we be sure this writing form came from Nubian peoples? Short answer is we can't. However, we have three other evincing historical themes that paint a very compelling picture. What I find fascinating is one historical figure in ancient times named Diodorus Siculus. In his writings, he casually described hieroglyphs as a Nubian invention without caution. He mentions it as if it was just common knowledge of the time. Here is what this Greek scholar has to say. We must now speak about the Ethiopian writing which is called hieroglyphic among the Egyptians, in order that we may omit nothing in our discussion of their antiquities. By saying Ethiopian here, Diodorus is referring to the modern region of Sudan, aka Nubian peoples. This casual mention of hieroglyphs being a Nubian invention cannot go ignored. It seems as though it was part of some ancient narrative. It's said in such confidence with no fear of polemic reaction from his audience. Some question the reliability of such Greek scholars such as Diodorus and Herodotus, and those questions have validity. Thankfully for my theory, however, it isn't wholly reliant on Diodorus. The most compelling of the evincing materials which may strengthen the claim of Diodorus and anchor my theory is the Nile Valley symbol for a human face. This is the hieroglyph for a face. Reflexively, most people around the world, given no context at all, may assume this was a depiction of a typical black African man. However, the controversy arises only when given its historical Egyptian context. This face is ubiquitous throughout Egyptian hieroglyphs, and some have found that to be odd, given that the stereotypical ancient Egyptian phenotype doesn't quite seem to match. This is where, in my opinion, it becomes difficult to advance the idea that Black Africa had no writing. If Black Africa did not invent a writing form, then what is this face doing in one of the most prodigious writing systems in human history? Why would a non-Black African etch such a distinct Black African face into their writing form? Would that really be a good explanation? If we accept old modules of understanding, we're then left with cognitive dissonance. I think an honest observer would agree that an inference to the best explanation is that the individual or individuals who invented this face hieroglyph looked like this themselves. I'm not at all suggesting that this is the only speculative option, but what I am saying is that this is ostensibly the simplest explanation. Variations of this face hieroglyph exist, but in my opinion, it's not enough to explain away the less ambiguous versions. The face hieroglyph is nearly antithetical with the stereotypical and popularized Egyptian phenotype. At the same time, Africa has a range of phenotypes, thus monolithic classifications based on region are problematic. The face hieroglyph's existence proves that. Egypt's phenotypical diversity is irrelevant here. That's not the reason I believe this face hieroglyph is in Egyptian writing. My theory would explain its existence as follows. We see this Black Africa poster child, if you will, written in the hieroglyphs because it's an ancient symbol the Egyptians inherited. Peoples further south, likely Nubian, created the symbol, and Egyptian scribes, seeing no need to modify, adopted this symbol and incorporated it alongside others into their writing form, thus creating Egyptian hieroglyphs. But in truth, This was a collective effort assiduously designed by the peoples along the Nile, sparked by the Nubians, producing one of the most influential writing forms in human history. That being said, let's review the information we have thus far. The Egyptians embraced the Nubian concept of statehood in pre-dynastic times according to Christopher Ehret. One Greek historian proclaims that the Egyptians borrowed hieroglyphs from the Nubians. And lastly, the hieroglyph for face, ubiquitous throughout Egyptian civilization, is indistinguishable from a typical Black African, one often associated with Nubians. Now, what grounds my theory is not any one data point in isolation, but the collection of all these data points gives the theory its value. There are several weaknesses that have the potential to discredit my theory. An example being that Diodorus may be unreliable, another being assumptions regarding the face hieroglyph's Nubian origin. But despite some of the weaknesses, I believe the theory can stand its ground. I think taking the sagacious advice of one of our old scholars, reading in between the lines of history, can be beneficial to understanding African history in a deeper way. Well, I'm all out, guys. Let me know your perspective in the comments section below. And if you like these videos and want to help in its continued production, consider supporting the home team on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.